Welcome everybody to a gathering of people who were like, yo, how do we up the power of a progressive agenda in British national politics, UK national politics? To that end, I thought I would just lead a little grounding, a little opening, and then maybe we'll hear from each of us. So if I may lead us and just invite us to, it's what I do for my singing workshops, and I think it's always a nice start. Just feel the feet, give them a wiggle, and bring the awareness to the sensations in the pads of the toes and the balls and the heels. Bring the awareness up to the sit bones, shift them left to right, and let the body be aware of the weight resting there, the body weight resting there. Nice deep breath, long slow exhalation. Soften the sides of the tongue. And whether the eyes are open or closed, come into owl eyes, where we sort of widen our view to peripheral vision. Take it all in. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge each of you, and me, and the other people interested in this conversation. Also to say hi to the earth beneath us and the whole land of Britain. All that dwells here, all the creatures, all the plants, the waters, all that could dwell here, all that would dwell more here, if things were done differently. Thinking of those who are becoming extinct or at risk of extinction, those we care for, those we love, those we want to serve. Raising our attention to all the people, every person in Britain, regardless of their political persuasion or race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, creed, ability, anything. Our care for each and every one of those that we want a politics considers all of them. Widening our awareness to the ecologies around the world and the people around the world who we're in relationship with through our markets, through our lifestyles, through our environmental impacts, and sending our care to that big breadth and width of life that we're in family with, in relationship with. Sending our awareness back to our ancestors who've gone through a lot of things, and some of them have been political and some of them have shaped our present day politics, and thanking them for all their work, and extending our awareness 7 generations forward to those not yet born and the world that we're shaping for them. Honouring the part in each of us that wants to find a politics that works for everyone we've named. And that's a huge challenge. There may not be many people in the world managing that right now. And hats off to those who are. May we learn from them. And may we be open to the innovation, the new ways of thinking and doing that may be wanting to rise at this time, so that we can indeed find a politics that works for all of life. With gratitude for your presence today, I welcome each of you here and I open this meeting. So welcome. There's 4 of us. I'm going to treat this really as an improvisation. I wrote a blog post, I think you all read it, saying, yo, we need a politics that does a better job at serving everyone, including the more than human realm. And the current leading party doesn't seem to be doing a good job. And I don't have that much faith in Labour or the Greens to do a good job. And I might be wrong, but the question is, if we want to organise our progressive power together under kind of one effective body politic, what do we do? Can we work within existing systems? Do we need to create something new? Where should this energy go? And what I thought we could do is go round don't know who wants to start. Maybe Jules wants to start. And say, I don't know, just introduce yourself to the others. Your name, what you do, where you are, and what you reckon, and what you would like to see, or a problem you see standing in the way that you don't know how to solve, but would need to be in a different situation. How does that sound?
Okay, yeah, fine. So I won't introduce myself because everyone knows me, but I mean, this, for me, this was prompted by, I can't remember how we got back in touch, Briony, but we
You
did.
sent me a Facebook friend request.
Yeah, I'm a technophobe, and I'm very rarely on Facebook. I'm now very active on Facebook with one person, which is Briony, and so Facebook does this thing where it sort of tells you to be a friend of someone. I don't quite know what it's all about, but I always ignore it, and for some reason I accepted the one from Briony a few months ago, and so it's, you know, it's either Mark Zuckerberg is leading us to have this conversation, or it was meant to be. So Briony and I knew each other probably, God, it could even be 20 years ago, I don't know, in London, around the Warn Again anti-apathy space. And so anyway, we started having this conversation, and I said to Briony, look, I've been completely out of the loop on anything except banking, basically, which are, you know, I think everyone here knows that I have these two projects ongoing, and other than that, I've been really myopic. And I used to be very engaged with the political, you know, the political journey in the UK, and the sort of Corbyn project and community wealth building and Podemos, and, you know, all this good stuff, Syriza and so forth. And I feel like for 4 years I'm completely out of the loop. And so Briony started to have this conversation with me, and I sort of said, well, maybe we need a new political party. And that's something I used to say every sort of year or so. And I know lots of people, you know, that Peter probably knows as well, the two lorries, for instance, and others in London who are sort of, you know, at the heart of the political kind of machine. And they and others like Neil Lawson would always say to me, don't be daft. You can never start a new political party. We just got to change the ones that are there. Shut up. So I just shut up. But anyway, it's still something that I wonder. You know, it has been done in other countries, successfully and unsuccessfully, of course. But I think it's influenced things, even if it's not been successful in leading to a long-term political party. So yeah, and I think I'll finish here by just saying I have the same view that Briony does of politics in the UK, which is that I'm not sure any of them really are on it, even the Green Party. Although again, I could be completely out of the loop, and they could be fantastic and wonderful. Obviously, there are some systemic challenges. Obviously, the most important one being proportional representation. My sort of orientation for the last 4 years, because of the bank, has been to shift my focus to local politics rather than national politics. And if you think national politics is difficult, Jesus Christ, local politics, wow. Don't even get me started. So I don't know what the answer to this is, and I think lots of highly knowledgeable, people like Rupert Reed, who've got lots of opinions, will tell us that we're silly, and that don't worry, we've got it in hand. But I think it's a useful conversation, provocation, if nothing else.
All right, great. Good to hear from you, Jules. Who'd like to go next?
Don't mind either way.
How about you then, Peter?
Okay. So I'll do a quick introduction because I know Jules, but not you two.
FYI, Matt, you might actually want to wait for a second because
yes,
Matt is arriving. Hello, welcome. Can you hear us?
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we can. Welcome, Matt. We're about 15 minutes in, and we're just going around and hearing people, like, your name, where you are, what you're working on, and what draws you to this conversation. We've had a bit of context setting. So Jules has been, and Peter's about to go. And welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, Matt. So yeah, I'm sitting in a shed in Bristol, and I've done lots of different things in my life, but they've all been involved with work around cultural change, justice, environment, that kind of thing. And I currently have a number of different hats involved in all of those areas. I don't have a particularly UK focus. And in fact, as of Tuesday last week or Wednesday, I'm no longer just a naturalized Briton. I am now also a German.
Oh, well done.
So that was really interesting, actually. My experience at the German embassy is kind of quite relevant to my feelings about what's blocking progress in the UK. I was there with my daughters. We'd had a long process to get our citizenship. And the civil servant, I'd had to deal with 4 civil servants over the process, and all 4 had been wonderfully friendly, supportive, and helpful, which is kind of wow. That's not a usual experience. And then this woman who actually saw me and my daughters, she made a really strong emotional connection. She apologized genuinely and personally for what had been done to our family,
Really?
and emphasized that this was a restitution rather than something being given to us.
Amazing.
And I came out of it, apart from being very deeply moved by how she'd done it, I came out of it thinking, what feels totally different about that? And what felt different, I decided in the end, was that the Germans have tried to deal with their collective guilt. They've looked at it. They've really, I mean, not 100% success, you know, failures in the denazification and lots of areas and all of that, but they made a real effort to educate themselves about what they had done. And of course, the glaring, obvious opposite to that is the total lack of engagement in Britain with, for most people, with the realities of British Empire and what that meant. And I was trying to think, you know, how can you construct a progressive movement when you've got this extraordinary, unexplored area of imperial guilt? And when it is explored, of course, the backlash is just ferocious. So I suppose in terms of that, what's blocking things in this country, that certainly is one of the things for me. Just in terms of what Jules said, which you missed, Matt, about, you know, it's possible to have new political parties and then make a real difference. Well, I think there's a really good recent example here in the UK, isn't there, Jules, of Brexit Party or UKIP or whatever, you know, whichever, you know, I mean, that's had an enormous impact. And, you know, setting up a political party is not necessarily about winning an election, is it? And that's a great example. Then my final comment is to end on a more positive note, maybe, although not about Britain. If there's a political process anywhere in the world that at the moment gives me energy, inspiration, hope in a deeply fractured and scary world, it's the People's Assembly's process in Chile, and that moving on to a plebiscite to get rid of the old neoliberal constitution and to elect a chamber of 155 people to write what is now going to be the first co-written by elected delegates ecological constitution. And on top of that, you know, the recent vote, it's a really significant majority vote for a progressive president who supports that. So I think it's important, if there is a focus on Britain, to actually really look at what's interesting in the rest of the world in that regard. And I will stop and I will pass to Theo.
Thanks so much, Peter. Yeah, nice to end on a bit of an inspiring note. I think this is a conversation that's very easy to collapse into doom and gloom. Yeah, so hello everyone. I'm Theo. I'm also based in Bristol, in South Bristol currently, working with an organisation called Life Itself, which is how I initially met Briony, which similarly kind of has like doing work around cultural change and changing views and values, but also kind of my particular area of focus and soon to be rebranded Life Itself Labs, looking at kind of issues around governance and alternative economics, etc. And I think, you know, brought to this conversation, so I grew up in Thanet in the southeast of England. So for those that sort of don't know, we were the place that had Nigel Farage running against Al Murray, the pub landlord, a couple of elections back. and only lost out to a UKIP defector to the Tory party who was charged with electoral fraud for that election. You know, one of the Brexit heartlands of Britain. And yeah, just what's sort of has been really, really present for me is kind of how what's kind of occurred to me throughout my life as, you know, the obvious points of kind of progressivism, or the, you know, and the benefits of progressivism, particularly for the worst off in society, are culturally embedded as a threat fundamentally, and, you know, reacted against in quite strong terms by people that I know and love, and who actually, you know, I would view as being sort of incredibly benefited. And yeah, so that kind of led to, I think, for a big period of my life, like real abject disillusionment with politics, and giving up on the entire thing. You know, looking, you know, if only we can innovate ourselves out of this mess with new technologies, new structures, etc. And it's only kind of recently that I've slowly returning to the view that kind of, you know, to use the Lord of the Rings analogy my colleague Rufus likes to make, like there's no way around the mountain, and that you kind of, politics is unavoidable, and sort of, I think, with, dare I say, a fluttering of hope at kind of local level examples that of amazing things that are happening. But yeah, I guess what I'm sitting with, and the kind of the problem and the challenge I see, is kind of how we can get round this kind of deeply kind of culturally embedded, and, you know, at the level of culture, threat response towards progressive politics, among vast swathes of the population, and particularly the swathes of the population that one would hope to really get on side in order to get things done. And I guess, just to finish, particularly in a context of a first past the post electoral system, where, sure, you know, we have had cases of political parties being successful, but, you know, the Brexit party being an example of a single issue party in a very sort of amenable political environment that allowed kind of like could push the Overton window in a very specific direction, I think, because of all of these structures, and kind of sitting with, okay, well, what would a progressive alternative to that look like in this context, and how might that stack up for efforts to kind of build a broader movement rather than a party. So I guess that's my inquiry at the moment. Guess I'll therefore pass to Matt.
Hi, everyone. I'm by far the least experienced and probably the least interesting person in this group, but hopefully at the very least have a slightly unique perspective on some things. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit all over the place at the moment, because until a couple of months ago, I was living in Kiev in Ukraine. And so, yeah, have obviously left behind a life that's kind of been a little bit destroyed over the last few days. So, yeah, obviously it's a very intense time, and I urge you all to do whatever you can to contribute to the aid actions. But yeah, leaving that aside, most of my political kind of, I suppose my political self was mostly formed in Russia, bizarrely, where I lived before I moved to Ukraine. And something I always felt in this country was a kind of inertia, particularly amongst people my age, which really disappointed me. I grew up in West Cornwall, in the most Brexit region of the country, that was also the one most hardly hit by Brexit. And it was a shame. And I kind of grew up with this anger towards the people who sat and allowed it to happen, amongst other things. And then I studied in Cambridge, where I was kind of simultaneously surrounded by class division, and also had my eyes open to it for the first time, kind of theoretically, in critical theory sessions. But it was only then moving to Russia, where obviously, I mean, to put it bluntly, people have slightly bigger issues to worry about, that I really felt there was kind of a sense of engagement, and it was exciting. There was so much energy. It felt like, you know, the young people of St. Petersburg, it wasn't this kind of detached attitude to politics, this kind of apathy of politics is something that just happens around us. It was this sense of we need to grab the opportunities we have and change things, or, you know, there was this understanding that the worst case scenario can and will happen without the force to change it. And so coming back to the UK, that's something that I really wanted to kind of bring with me and find some kind of energy at the lowest level grassroots movements. Unfortunately, haven't been able to find that. I haven't really been here long enough to establish anything, but I'm very much looking forward to this conversation and to seeing where we can take things.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone. Great to hear from you. And Matt, can I just add to everyone what you are going to focus on for your masters?
Yeah, of course. Oh yes, sorry. Yeah, so I am starting a master's at the end of this year, and my focus is on, I mean, the broad field is Anthropocene politics. So essentially, you may well be familiar with the concept, but the Anthropocene is a proposed new geological era in which the Earth and the environment is kind of inextricable from humanity as a whole. So human impact on the planet. There is no nature, essentially. There is no analysis of the environment without the analysis of human impact upon it. My specific area of focus is on artificial intelligence and expansion of AI technology, particularly in terms of AI governance systems. But yeah, I won't go into anything too deeply now. That's the broad kind of overview.
Okay, great. Wow, you said in that last thing, there is no nature, and I'm looking at AI in the context of like, wait, but it's, I suppose my view is like, it's all nature. So, okay, really interesting. But I'm really curious in this term, like politics of the Anthropocene. Oh, interesting. Well, it's a beautiful range of themes you've all touched on, and there's definitely more. And I think if we're looking at the political landscape, I think let's call it, should we call them the naysayers? The people that Jules points to.
Briony, sorry to interrupt, but aren't you going to tell us your bit?
Oh, am I going to tell you my bit? Oh, thank you, Peter. Yes, interrupt away. I'm Briony. I'm a musician and a music teacher. I studied political science at university in Belfast and at Berkeley. I worked in a think tank called Demos. I did various think pieces for government strategy units in the realm of the future of education and technology of education, personalization. I then worked in behavior change in the realm of sustainability and sustainable consumption in business and government till my late 20s, when I felt like we were pissing in the wind, trying to change behavior, when, everywhere on the tube there were these adverts everywhere, going, materialism, make your lifestyle more sexy, buy stuff. And standing on the tube going, what is beneath this? And it's the growth engine I saw of PLCs and the duty to grow and the pressure to grow, the maxim of growth. And I was like, wow, all our work is kind of pissing in the wind as long as there is this growth machine that is driving material expansion, that is gobbling up the world, among other problems. Applied to do a PhD looking at sustainable models of business ownership and finance. And I was also really interested in the role of business ownership models in the redistribution of wealth, really with resources going from employees and consumers to shareholders, and us all just participating in that a lot via our pensions and what have you, and nobody looking at the kind of inequality patterns that I felt that was a really big driver of. So I wanted to do a PhD in it. Meanwhile, I went off to India for a bit, discovered improvisation, and that was the rest of my life. But I keep sort of tracking politics, and I suppose I've spent a lot of time in eco-villages and places on the quite far, in Foucault's terms, look at what's happening in the peripheries. I've spent quite a lot of time in peripheries like Tamara and the Network for New Culture. I followed Charles Eisenstein quite deeply. So I would like to live in an eco-village. I'm reading Hospicing Modernity right now. Like, I would like to hospice modernity and birth regenerative culture somehow. And I'd like to do that in terms of my home and the village, but also not to ignore the nation and the world. So the kind of the both and of the local and the big picture. I'm a dual citizen, UK, US. I've got a lot of connections all around Europe. So I suppose my focus is music, but I've got a lot of politics in my veins. Ancestors, forefathers, foremothers. I can't help but look at the political realm. And I suppose that leads me to saying, like, wow, like current politics seems so far from my sense of what's important. And I suppose it's this feeling of I don't feel represented. And I would like to feel represented. I want us to bring our lives into balance with all of life. I feel that inclusive prosperity is possible. I don't think we should have such an unequal society. I see people really fucking struggling in the 5th richest country in the world, and I don't think that's good. I want it to change. I don't want the government to be getting more dangerous. I want it to be getting more trustworthy. I don't want, well, I want our kind of sense of information crisis, sense of like news trustworthiness to be looked at. And I'd add a new concern, which is like more and more people are spouting things that really sound like conspiracy theories to me. I'm alarmed. I really feel very challenged by the range of views on the political sphere that are around. So I suppose Neil Lawson, Compass guy. Jules, you're muted.
Yeah.
Neil Lawson. He would say it's all about the progressive alliance. You know, it's all about getting an alliance between the progressive parties so that we get power, and then within power change to proportional representation, and then we can have sort of more honesty and integrity within our parties and party how we like. He seems to be saying that, but what I see is like the Conservatives getting an absolute landslide in the last election. Like I'm not seeing actual power being expressed by a progressive alliance. And I might be saying two different things, and one is like, how do very progressive people have a party that represents them, and another thing being like, how do progressives get formal power? And they might be two different things. Like, you might need to create actually quite an extremist party or an extreme seeming party that's gonna talk about these things in terms of real politics, but it's not really trying to get votes, but actually trying to widen the political discourse. And then maybe it's a different strategy to actually try and get votes. But I have this feeling, this energy, like something wants to happen, like something more needs to happen. We need to come together more and become more powerful somehow. And I'm kind of trying to find the way. Yeah. So thank you for joining with me. And I'm aware there's a kind of another 5 to 10 people who are kind of in the loop and expressing interest in this conversation, but not here today. So I might open the floor at this point for, like, you know, what comes to mind as we hear each other. And maybe we'll cap it at 3 p.m. UK. We were going to do 90 minutes, but that was to make room for more voices. So with 5 of us, maybe we'll cap it at an hour. And I'll just open the floor now for, like, what's moving, what's alive.
Well, I just have one thought to throw in, because I tend to be quite sort of, I don't know, maybe it's my campaigning background, but I'm sort of quite practically oriented. So I don't feel like I know enough about what's actually going on, partly because, as I said, I'm very out of the loop. So I started to scribble kind of, apart from who I'd ask, which is Laurie McFarlane and Laurie Laybourne and Neil Lawson and people like that, sort of entities that are doing stuff in this broad space that I think we've ought to bring into the conversation, perhaps in some form. So my brain dump was the community wealth building movement and the Democracy Collaborative, and Joe Guinan. Peter, you know Joe well. I mean, obviously he's an avid Labour Party far left kind of. He's a Brit based in the US, but very informed about some of these things. Obviously, there's a Green Party, and I'm really out of touch with what they are thinking about the world. Then there's all the sort of foreign examples that, you know, Chile you mentioned, and sort of, you know, participative democracy and budgeting, you know, in Paris and obviously Podemos and experiences in Greece and so forth. Then there's the Economic Change Unit. Are people aware of that as an entity? But obviously Peter will be. but I just looked at it again, and I was kind of thinking, oh, what are they doing? And then I just looked at the steering group, and it's kind of INET and Omidyar and NEF, and I mean some entities, IPPR, that I sort of, there's some what I feel, those Friends Provident, there's some sort of more progressive people there as well, but it's kind of, you know, it sort of seemed like the sort of echo chamber a little bit. Anyway, then there's Claire's, obviously, there's NEF, there's IPPR, there's Neon, Progressive Alliance, you've already mentioned. Then the other thing I scribbled down was just sort of Corbynism, you know, I mean, obviously it's somewhat died a death, but I think that was it was an interesting example of that sort of tapping into the disillusion with politics that I think maybe it was Matt said that used that phrase earlier. So, you know, what's happened of that project? I wasn't overwhelmingly in support of the project and its policy landscape and its orientation necessarily, but it made a difference for a while. You could argue as to whether it was just the wrong person at the head of it, or whether it was always doomed to fail, and that's a long conversation. But anyway, yeah, I don't know to what degree that's helpful, but it's sort of, I guess I'm feeling slightly unrooted in all of this because I'm sort of out of the loop as to what interesting stuff is going on. And yeah, so it'd be interesting to bring some of those other people into the conversation. Some already we've invited but haven't been able to come along. And in a very practical sense, I think if we want to try and get some other people on, I think a doodle is a good way to find a date that people can do. So maybe we do that, and we accept that it might not happen for 6 weeks or something, particularly with Easter heading, I guess. Yeah.
Thanks, Jules. I love how you like run off this like really thorough and interesting list and then say, oh, you know, I'm really ungrounded in what's going on. But that's a brilliant list. So yeah, interesting. Thank you.
And something I would add, Briony, jumping on the back of what you were saying about how it's that sense you can feel something, but you don't know how to capitalize on it. Or and I think Theo also mentioned a need for kind of a cultural shift, like quite radically. And I think that is the key. This is some kind of quite intensive, I'd say re-education, but just education. Re-education suggests that people were ever educated in the first place. I think political education in this country is absolutely appalling. I think there's also a terrible state versus private divide on that level in the schooling system. Like I ended up at university having gone through the state education system with no understanding of politics or political theory or anything, and felt quite out of my depth amongst people at university who had been to Eton and Harrow and were a lot more globally aware than I was and politically aware than I was. And that almost kind of exacerbates class divides in the sense that the people with the most stakes are the ones with the least education. I also just think that, I mean, I'm a kind of, I'm unashamed socialist, heavy anti-capitalist, and I think more and more people are, and I think less and less people know how to communicate that, how to kind of, everyone's feeling the kind of malaise of kind of living under living under neoliberalism, feeling the pinch of current economic systems, but not quite knowing how to articulate an alternative. And I think that that's a really important door to open. I'm kind of trying to, in my own head, trying to kind of figure out how I would suggest doing that beyond. I mean, obviously there are some amazing groups who are doing amazing things, but as far as I know, I kind of take the blunt stance of if they haven't reached me, then they're not reaching enough people, because, you know, if anything, I'm somebody quite receptive to this kind of, to such groups and to such kind of thinking. And every time I'm aware that I learn about this kind of new thing, I think, well, not enough is being done to make sure that there's access to these channels and to make sure that people can reach things. So yeah, I think some kind of alliance, some kind of more directed coalition and front that would, I'm not talking like a parliamentary coalition, I'm talking coordination between groups rather than being kind of isolated entities that are functioning, doing all amazing things, but with no sense of cohesion and no sense of kind of building towards common goals. Anyway.
Yeah, great points. Thanks, Matt. Who's next?
I just to say I think really feeling resonance there with what you touched on, Matt, particularly around that point of kind of broadening accessibility of stuff that's already there, or kind of, you know, in the burgeonings. And I think to that, kind of what presents as really crucial to me is kind of like, and I guess also relating to your point, Jules, around not being fully abreast of things, I think even those of us that are kind of to varying degrees plugged into what's going on politically, not allowing kind of our perceptions to guide kind of our analyses of what's going on, and doing kind of like some real engagement with a broad spectrum of actors sort of within kind of the usual suspects of kind of progressive political people and beyond, for kind of the root causes of why this sense that there is kind of an energy and we detachment is not translating into anything at this point, and has not. So, you know, I think we've all perhaps got sort of ideas of why the Corbyn project failed, and as you say, the reasons for that. Similarly, kind of, you know, there are lots of progressives that are calling for a progressive alliance and nothing's really materializing. There are lots of organizations doing great work around, you know, progressive economics, around etc., and so on and so forth. And sort of having that deep-rooted understanding of, okay, well, why isn't this sort of translating into tangible momentum? And I think particularly, why is this still not really filtering out in the way that we might see that it really needs to, into the broader communities of the country that are going to be so important to get on side? You know, I think there are vast swathes of the population which are both very sort of electorally significant, but also quite downtrodden by our current sort of socio-political and economic systems, that are unable for whatever reason to engage with A, sort of ideas, and B, initiatives that are very much already kind of in existence in some shape or form. And I think a kind of deep understanding of why that is and where the blockers are is a really necessary first step to understanding how we might circumvent them.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. So it feels to me as if there is a meaningful space for common ground, as long as people focus on their values rather than on their the more manifesting issues that they're often responding to. So, you know, some people are really going to work hard on issues around inequality or child poverty or refugee rights and borders, you know, but for me, influenced very much by, as Jules knows, by Tom Crompton's work at Common Cause Foundation, I think that there is an area of intrinsic values which are common across all of those. And I haven't seen movements trying to explicitly not only link across the differing groups, organizations, movements motivated by those kinds of core intrinsic values, but also thinking about who can we work with to communicate this outside of our silos. And actually, when you talk about people, a couple of people, 3 people I think have mentioned what happened under Corbyn, and forgetting Corbyn as an individual, who I think is an extraordinary man, actually, like all of us with weaknesses. But what was really interesting for me was how he, as an individual, and the policies spoke to young people, the very people who Matt was saying appear disaffected. And you know, there was an energy of potential, particularly in 2017, around that. And there were all of these new media organizations, Novara and Squawkbox, and what Momentum were doing, and now you've got Declassified. You know, there's a whole bunch of alternative media, so-called alternative media entities, which actually, when you look at the hits they get, are whacking The Guardian and the other kind of corporate media entities. So, you know, it doesn't feel as if there's been a strategic attempt to pull those kinds of entities, be they media or movements or organizations, together and say, look, there's a set of core shared values at the heart of what all of we are doing. The definition of we being really critically important always, because you know that word can so easily exclude. And so then moving on from that, well, if these are the core values that actually talk to most people in Britain, Because when you talk to people about their values, that's what they tend to prioritize. And then for a whole bunch of reasons, they may well vote in a way that is very different to those core values. But that's got to do with the kind of what feels normal, what the mainstream media has normalized, has made acceptable. You know, there are ways to get around that if you've got a meaningful coalition. Now, my problem with most of the attempts at coalitions, like, for example, you know, Neil's valiant efforts at Compass to bring together a progressive alliance, is that they are often terrified of alienating the mainstream, the centre, which I would actually apply to Rupert's idea around the what did he call it, the moderate flank. It's extraordinary. I read his booklet this morning, and I realised at the end of it he hadn't mentioned capitalism or economics or a whole range of things once while talking about how to really do something about climate change. And there are some fundamental dividing issues. Can we deal with the urgency of climate breakdown and other things without addressing capitalism? You know, and actually, I would say that's where there are hard decisions to be made by anyone or any groups trying to form some kind of more unified approach. But you know, there's enough common ground for me, particularly if you bring in the good social media and alternative media entities to create something. Now, why that hasn't happened? Well, we have a tradition, don't we, on the left or in progressive circles of circular firing squads, of kind of saying that person who actually in many ways is the closest to me politically is my deepest enemy because they deviate by 0.2 of a degree. So the question would be then, what aspects of our growing understandings of inner transformative work, about projection, about all of those sorts of things, could be used to inform a deliberate alliance building attempt?
Speak, Peter. I love it. Okay, I'll go next. Yeah, working backwards from what you're saying, I'm really turned on my ideas of how do we practice pluralism in an age of division. The practice of pluralism becomes increasingly crucial. So how do we do that? And yeah, the inner work. Theo and I spent, can I say how we met, Theo? Yeah, we spent a week doing an IFS retreat in the context of building conscious community, so internal family systems. So when you're activated, when you're like, oh, but Peter is about check shirts and I'm about plain clothes, you know, and so we can't speak anymore. The way you yeah, he's both. The way I recognize such an othering statement, such a judging statement, I catch it as what we call the trailhead, and I'm like, yo, Peter does it. Like that judgment of Peter's dress taste is not important in this world. What's happening for me? And I look inside and I find, you know, an inner 5-year-old who got told off about her schoolwear, whatever, you know, but the way that we own our triggers and do the inner work rather than really attached to processes of othering and animization that are the basis of war. And we're not going to get far if that's how we roll, if we're trying to come together and be powerful. And if we're trying to work in a nation where some want Brexit and some don't, and some want this and some don't, and I think isn't that it? Like, how do we work together as a nation? How do we work together as a world? How do we work together as a team, as a coalition, or as a party, or as a whatever we want to become, as we sort of put our poles together and make something bigger than each of us? So that's, yeah, I love what you're saying there, Peter. I think it's crucial, and I think it's a really growing field of awareness and practice. It's important for all kinds of relationships. And as I hear you speak, what comes to my mind, I think, is orchestration. And I want to make a mind map now, I think I'm going to go through this video and take notes of everyone you've mentioned, and then there's more, but make a mime. And as a musician, I'm like, all right, this is the trumpet, and that's the wind, and like that's the strings over there, you know, and then here's who's in that section. And then here's the bass line that we all play, or here's the tempo, here's the time signature we're sharing as we all play these different parts. And so it's the kind of, I don't know, it's like the progressive orchestra. And then there's people like closer to the center or further out, and then there's people who are like, oh no, you're really playing this in a different kind of genre, in a different style. So maybe we'll have two orchestras. Okay.
Can I ask you a quick question, Briony?
Sure.
You referred to this nation, and I think that's one of the problems.
Great.
Because I don't know when you say that whether you mean England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, or whether you mean England. I suspect that that will make a big difference, because obviously there are significant differences. I mean, it's extraordinary to watch the change in Scotland from the 70s of a kind of bitter, xenophobic, misanthropic feel about it to a confident kind of wannabe Nordic style, more open, still neoliberal underneath in economics, but you know, very different at some elements of the culture, Scotland now. And I think Wales is moving very much in that Scots direction. So there's that question, but there's also the question of, there is a deeply racist assumption of what England or Britain is. If you think about what happened after, as the UK lost its empire and decided to turn to having a Commonwealth, what they said legally was that all the members of the Commonwealth were British citizens. And actually, of course, you had the right to come and live and work in Britain. And they meant white members of the Commonwealth. And when brown and black members of the Commonwealth started to come and live in Britain, you had a series of nationality acts and a continual restricting of what is British to where we are now with a hostile border. So I think any exploration of England as a nation or the UK as a nation that doesn't somehow grapple with that is going to have a kind of, a bit like the US has the unexploded nuclear bomb at the heart of being founded on genocide, dispossession, and slavery. You know, Britain has this, has this unexploded bomb at its heart. And it was really interesting, wasn't it, with I mean, you know, I'm in Bristol. The reaction to the Colston statue, the Colston 4, all of that, which goes, in many ways, you know, it's ludicrous, the fuss over a statue of a slaver, but it goes straight to the heart of people's identity. And so the bit that I grapple with is how one enables a meaningful exploration of extraordinarily brutal, cruel British cultural identity, which is totally ignored or pushed down. And so it's kind of easy to say, let's do the inner work, but you know, what would be unleashed by that is pretty dramatic, I think.
Thanks, Peter. You've left us all speechless, which is great. Yeah, I teach like week-long improvised singing workshops, and they often just become grief rituals. I have people who lie down and cry for the entire week. The grief beneath our fear, our judgment, the way we've internalized it, the way we treat each other, the cultural trauma that runs through the family systems. I face it every day. I face a group of students, and I've been facing it myself for 15 years, and I keep going. It's not small. But
so in answer to that, it feels as if part of the answer to that is it not approaching this as something with a goal where X group has to achieve this transformative movement or whatever, but it's approaching it as a practice that is somehow inviting to people, maybe.
Yeah, and I think that sense of invitation is so vital, because I mean, I think it's really interesting that there's been this kind of, I sense a coalescence in this group around the role of culture, the role of values, the role of kind of the inner world in this. But as kind of has been touched on, I think so powerfully by you, Peter, and then also sort of by you, Briony, that kind of it's really hard and really horrible. in many ways to confront this stuff and to deal with it in quite the visceral way, which is sort of often so necessary for the process of healing to begin as a nation, and how one can kind of create spaces and containers for that to happen, which can genuinely invite in a way that is non-judgmental, in a way that creates safety, broad swathes of the population, and particularly those swathes of the population that as I mentioned, sort of culturally associate this stuff with threat and with attack. The swathes of poor, disenfranchised white people in my hometown. I think if you start talking to them about taking down statues, about confronting Britain's colonial past, they think you're gunning for them. And how we create room for that so vital inner work to take place, such that actually the people that you get showing up and engaging with it are the ones that we really, really need to be getting on side and to be kind of going through this process with us, I think is something that I sit with quite deeply, and find to be a bit of a wicked problem.
Yeah, completely. I think to me, it just seems like the fact that in this country we have working class people, the most disenfranchised, voting en masse Conservative and for hardline, right-wing economic policies, shows something's gone very wrong in people's kind of understanding of the way our society is structured. It points to me to some kind of, I mean, if you wanted to be particularly cynical, you could use the word propaganda, but definitely a kind of miseducation culturally, in which I think is leading a lot of people astray. The question of how to fix that is, I guess, what we're discussing right now. All I will say is that I feel that there is a kind of tendency towards moderation and the moderate that's actually missing a trick. I think that so for example, let's take Corbyn, and when Corbyn was the most radical Labour has the most kind of the radical proposition that Labour has seen in a while. And I can't remember another time I've seen so much energy amongst people my age about politics, about kind of mainstream politics. This is, I remember when in the election when Corbyn was running, just the excitement. There were people in this. I mean, I was in Cambridge, so I'm well aware this isn't a representative sample. But there were people in the streets kind of rejoicing. It was this real feeling of kind of excitement, of anticipation. People thought that we would wake up with Corbyn in government and we would be seeing the start of a new era of change, of something. There was this real feeling of vitality that I haven't felt in this country since, although to be fair, I haven't been here very long. I think that we shouldn't be too afraid of pushing the boundaries and of radicalism. I think people are more receptive to it than people think. And I think that in being kind of this fallacy of moderation, and that we have to kind of keep everyone sick to the middle for fear of alienating certain people, we actually end up without any kind of spark. And I think we need a certain level of bravery just to be radical and kind of nail your colours to the mast in a way.
Just one very direct, quick response.
Okay, last point, because we're going to stop it. But yeah, Jules has the last word.
I do find it. I find it interesting that we've sort of persuaded ourselves that Corbyn was radical and Corbynism was radical, because
when it's not. I agree.
There's a perfect example of the Everton window having shifted dramatically, and we've sort of fallen into this trap. It was so not radical, so not that left wing. If you truly believe in a post-capitalist, democratic socialist sort of economic paradigm. So it's fascinating how we've sort of all slightly fallen for that. I don't know how, that's not in any way useful specifically on this, but yeah.
No, I think it's very important. It's a very important thing to note in general. The fact that people's understanding has become kind of so warped that even relatively kind of mild moderate socialism is seen as, and it's worse in America, where anything even vaguely kind of hinting of something egalitarian or is slapped with the label of like communism, Marxism, with absolutely no understanding of what those terms mean or their kind of theoretical usefulness or application. It's just this kind of scaremongering using kind of empty language. But yeah, I think Theo's touched on this like fear. But yeah.
Yeah.
And it comes back to that political
Wait,
aim.
I'm going to stop you because I said we finish at 3 and it's 3, and this could. But thank you for the energy in what you're saying. Ooh. You can't light a fire. You can't start a fire without a spark. It comes from higher, even if we're just dancing in the dark. Hey, everyone. I feel like we've opened a really interesting box, and I personally want to stay with these threads. I want to go through what you said. I'm going to make some notes, maybe some mind maps. I'm going to try and organize an April meeting. I'm going to write to you and ask if it's okay to put this on YouTube, because I have a YouTube channel and I put things on YouTube and share them, but I will write to you for your consent. I feel that what we're discussing is important and exciting, and just maybe end by just bringing a bit of awareness, if I can, back to the body. Wiggle the feet, feel the weight in the bum in the seat, nice deep breath. These things can excite us and deregulate us, and we come back to calm. We can see broadly. We're softening the size of the eyes. It's the tongue and the eyes. Thank you, Jules. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Theo. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for showing up in such constructive and informed ways, and thank you for giving a shit about our times, our world, all of life. And may we continue. And I don't know, we need some kind of like thundercats are ho, thunderbirds are ho kind of like ending. What's our like ending ritual?
Can you improvise something, Briony?
Okay, everybody unmute and say ho, like long one. Ho! That's it. Great.
Lovely to meet you, new people. Nice to see you again, Jules, after so long. Cheers, everyone.
Lovely
Lovely
to
meet you,
in
Peter.
fact, meet you.
Good to do this again.
Yeah, very much so. Thanks, Brian and Jules, for organising. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Oh, bye, Briony.